There are many games that get released with a Western theme, but very few seem to become super popular. With the exception of the Red Dead Redemption series, Western-themed games just don't seem to reach the level of popularity that some other themes achieve. The game we're looking at here, 12 is Better Than 6, is one of these games with a Western theme. It also meshes this Western theme with a Hotline Miami style of gameplay. Does this combination make a game that is worth a bit more popularity? Or is it one of those games that just doesn't really stand out too much? Let's take a look. 12 is Better Than 6 is a top-down shooter developed by Inkstains Games. It was released for PC in 2015 and for the Nintendo Switch in 2019. It is $9.99 on both platforms. The Nintendo Store says it has an M rating for content, which is very fitting for the game, even though I couldn't find a rating on the ESRB site. And this rating comes from both violence and language found in the game. I should also note that I am playing on the PC here for this review, so I don't really know a lot about how it runs on the Switch. Let's get to the story of 12 is Better Than 6. You start the story as a Mexican man who has lost his memory. He is a prisoner at a mining camp that treats its prisoners very brutally. A man named Juan kind of takes him under his wing, but Juan becomes a victim to the ruthlessness of the camp. Your character then takes on Juan's name and seeks to escape the mining camp, figure out why he was sent there and who he is. This is done by roaming Texas and killing wagon loads of enemies. If I'm being honest, the story here isn't one that I really found all that enjoyable. I don't mind the use of amnesia as a plot device. I get why it is done, and it helps add mystery or a way to figure out the world, or both. It largely worked for me, as the early game really had me wondering who your character was and what led him to his situation at the start of the game. This interest, though, quickly evaporated once you learned more about your character and his past. To put it simply, your character is kind of awful. Actually, I didn't really find any characters in this game that weren't treacherous or unlikable. It's okay to have a cast of kind of villains and people who aren't necessarily great, but it has to be done really well for it to work, at least for me. And I found it hard to care about any of the characters here, which isn't a good situation to find yourself in. With unlikable characters that are basically there to point you in a direction to kill some particular group of people, the story itself doesn't really develop into much of anything. Your character kills people, gets those who survive mad at him, and then either kills the rest of them or kills other people to try to make them happy, and this cycle just kind of repeats over and over again. Not only does it not have a very engaging story, but the ending of that story is also very underwhelming. It's not a surprising ending, really, given the cast of untrustworthy characters and everything, but it just didn't leave you very fulfilled when the credits start rolling. Just leaves you with a story that isn't very strong and yet still manages to disappoint with the ending. There is also the fact that the game is very reliant on stereotypes. It's kind of hard to tell if this is done to try to add seriousness to the game about how these stereotypes were rampant in the Old West, or as humor for the game. Personally, this doesn't really matter too much because it didn't really work either way for me. It just comes across as unnecessary and annoying fairly quickly. One last thing that is kind of connected to the story is that I found myself really curious about the title. Looking into it, I found that it seems to be based off the quote, "better to be judged by 12 than to be carried by 6. This is basically saying that it is better to be judged in the court with a jury of 12 than to have your coffin carried by 6 pallbearers. This doesn't really fit with the content of the game. Your character doesn't really care a bit about the law and seems to live thinking it is better to kill and be killed than to leave it to the law. More fitting, and even the name of an upgrade in the game, is that 2 6-shooters are better than just 1. In other words, 12 bullets are better than 6, which meshes much better with the story and the gameplay present here. I don't often have too many questions about the title of games. This one piqued my curiosity, and I'm not sure that I found a satisfying answer to it. While the story was super disappointing to me, I found the gameplay to be much better overall. The base top-down shooter gameplay is solid, and if you've played games like Hotline Miami, this will give you a similar feeling, even though there are also some differences. This style of game places you in a map full of enemies and sets you free to kill everyone you can while trying to accomplish some objective. This objective is usually to kill everyone or to get to a certain point on the map. If you're hit, you're killed and you have to start that map over again. What makes 12 is Better Than 6 unique is the cool way that the controls try to emulate Old West guns. You have to hit a button to cock the hammer of your gun before shooting again, and you also reload your weapons 1 bullet at a time. It's a neat little feature and a good way of trying to give you the feel of the weaponry of the Old West, but it can also be a bit frustrating, especially in the midst of hectic firefights, and early on it can lead you to dying quite a bit as you get used to these mechanics. As you go through levels, you will need to pick up various weapons, ammo, and also money. There are only 4 main weapons in the game: a revolver, rifle, shotgun, and the bow. You also have a knife to use for stealth kills, and can also find dynamite to toss at people to blow them up as well. Personally, I enjoyed the bow the best, probably because it allowed for distance stealth and wouldn't alert other enemies from the gunfire. You can also pick up your arrows after you shoot them. But sadly, this is the only main weapon that is not as readily available as the others. This was a little disappointing, but anytime I could find the bow, I was definitely using it. Connected to your weapons is ammo, which again is another kind of unique feature in the game. To gain ammo in most games, you just kind of run over the weapon or ammo and it's added to your inventory. Here you have to unload your weapon manually, which will add ammo to your inventory. Then you can pick up another weapon or your weapon back up if that's what you dropped in the first place. It's an interesting and unique way of doing things, but it really isn't a lot of fun in practice. It just winds up feeling out of place with the gameplay that tries to be really kind of fast-paced and slows it down a little too much and can kind of have you trying to find guns and pick them up and take their ammo and then drop that gun. And it just kind of makes things slow way down for a game that's about taking out enemies as quick as possible. Money helps you buy upgrades for your character. This can be, a breastplate to help you deflect certain attacks, an upgrade to dynamite that ties dynamite to rats and sends them to your enemies, or the ability to hold an extra revolver to mow down enemies, and a couple other ones. Buying these upgrades will require you to pick up bounty missions in certain town areas in the game because you don't really make enough money just by doing the normal story mode. The bad thing with this is that these missions are rather repetitive and get old rather fast. Sometimes with them, you even get kind of spawned in at a weird spot, which will have enemies be shooting at you right away, which wasn't all that fun. A couple other negative aspects of the gameplay is the loading screen, which is a map of Texas and shows your travels. It's kind of cool, like the map looks really nice, but this takes way too long. It also seems like it has some random encounters every once in a while you travel, which again kind of aren't a lot of fun. These encounters and the bounties felt like they were just there to add some playtime to the game because the story wasn't very long. Even with doing those and getting money in order to buy all of the upgrades, this still only took me a little less than 4 hours to complete the story. The camera in the gameplay is also a little weird as you walk around. Thankfully, this is an option you can toggle on and off in the options. However, if you don't realize it, the camera wobbling around is a bit disorienting. I didn't have a terrible problem with it, but it was definitely noticeable while I was playing. All said and done, I found the gameplay a stronger part of the game than the story, but even so, there were just a number of things that were either mixed or that I just didn't like the implementation of. The worst offenders were the parts of the game that felt drug out or like they were filler to pad the runtime for the game a little bit. But even then, even some of the good things like, the feel of the Old West weaponry and how you reload and gain ammo, they just were really kind of good on paper, but in execution, certain aspects just didn't really fit the type of game that they were trying to go for here, at least in my opinion. The art style of 12 is Better Than 6 is kind of interesting. It goes for a mostly monochromatic look of black and white. While it does have shades of gray in the game, the only other color is the red of shed blood. It creates an interesting look, but how much you enjoy it will depend on how much you like the black and white aesthetic. I kind of had mixed feelings on the art style. I really liked the artwork used for the story, as I felt that they were really well done and it gave the feeling of the old black and white Western movies. However, when it came to gameplay, this style didn't excite me as much. Levels felt a bit barren and lacking in detail. Levels taking place in a similar type of location just felt way too similar. This was also a feeling I had about the characters. Your only real indication of characters are the hats they're wearing and the weapon they have, except for Native American enemy. This just made the characters all feel too similar and lacking in variety. In terms of sound, the music is just okay. It's fitting for the game and gives you more upbeat music as you're battling against your enemies, but will slow down and give you some more kind of gentle tunes when you're in town where you don't have to worry about getting attacked. Some of the tracks evoke feelings of the Old West a bit better than others in my opinion, but overall it's not a bad soundtrack, but I can't say that it will probably stick with you either. The sound effects in the game aren't bad though, with the sounds of gunfire, breaking glass, and explosions, making you feel like you're taking part in an Old West shootout. You even get some nice train noises when you play on the levels where you're on a train. Definitely has a lot of the good sound effects for an Old West themed game. In terms of performance, I did not have really any issues. The game ran fine for me, and I don't think I had any crashes, anything like that. No bugs, no glitches. Everything ran pretty smoothly. The strongest part of 12 is better than 6 is its gameplay. But even this has some flaws and isn't quite able to bring the game up from a rather flat story and unlikable characters. I think with a much more interesting story, this could have been a much better game. While I was initially interested in seeing where the story was going, it didn't really feel like it went much of anywhere. Even the goal of revenge that does get somewhat developed doesn't feel like it is able to hit right with an ending that is severely disappointing. I did enjoy the gameplay, and the game is short enough to not overstay its welcome. Despite this, there were still parts of the game that felt a bit like padding. It would have been better if either those weren't present, or they were able to be made a bit more interesting. Having harder characters be bounties, or like a boss character, or something like that would have made the side content just a little bit more interesting. With these things in mind, I am rating 12 is better than 6, a 6 out of 10. You'll get hooked early on into quickly moving through levels and taking out enemies, but if you stop and think about the story and some of the flaws in the gameplay, you're gonna not love it maybe quite as much. Certainly seems like it does try to take some inspiration from Hotline Miami, but everything really kind of fails to meet that same level of quality. Now, even though I'm rating this a 6 out of 10, for me, that still means that I would say the game is more good than bad. But I would only recommend buying it if you find it on sale. There is some fun to be had here, but there are also a lot of flaws and things that just really didn't click with me. Sadly, this is one Western game that kind of earns its anonymity.